Good afternoon, everybody. It's me, Lieutenant PK, with part 2 of our lesson on arrests and dwellings. If you missed part 1, you should really go watch that one before going on with this one. I covered warrantless, non-consensual entries to make felony and misdemeanor arrests. Today we'll be talking about entries into dwellings when you have an arrest warrant for the person inside. Here's our first scenario. We have an arrest warrant for John Bad Guy. He's wanted for burglary of a dwelling, F2, and grand theft, F3. Officers respond to his residence, where they can see the suspect looking out of an upstairs window, but the suspect is refusing to come out or open the door. So the legal question becomes, can an LEO enter the dwelling of a person named in an arrest warrant without consent to make the arrest? Yes. You may remember the U.S. Supreme Court case Payton versus New York from part 1 of this lesson. Well, the court said during that case, for Fourth Amendment purposes, an arrest warrant founded on probable cause implicitly carries with it the limited authority to enter a dwelling in which the suspect lives. And this part's very important, when there is reason to believe the suspect is within. A law enforcement officer is also authorized to make forced entry if necessary. Let's take a look at Florida Statute 901.19, right of an officer to break into a building. If a peace officer fails to gain admittance after she or he has announced her or his authority and purpose in order to make an arrest, either by a warrant, is which we're talking about here, or when authorized to make an arrest for a felony without a warrant, which is what we talked about in part 1, those circumstances, the officer may use all necessary and reasonable force to enter any building or property where the person to be arrested is, or, and this part's important, is reasonably believed to be. See, that part sounds just like the court in Payton. So, just because someone has a warrant for their arrest doesn't mean that you, as a law enforcement officer, can enter their house anytime to look for them to try to arrest them. You have to reasonably believe they're inside, and that's going to be based on specific facts and circumstances. In our scenario here, it was pretty easy because they positively ID'd the suspect looking out of the window. But in real life, it's not always that easy. Sometimes you have to do a little bit of legwork. For example, go talk to the neighbors, see if they know John. Maybe they'll say, hey, yeah, I just saw John come home 5 minutes ago and go in the front door. If his truck's still there, he's still there. Something to that effect. And always remember to document why you reasonably believed the person was inside. If it becomes a problem down the road without documentation, you may have some trouble justifying your entry. Let's change our scenario a little bit and say that our suspect, John Bad Guy, only has an arrest warrant for misdemeanor charges. In this case, battery DV, M1, and petty theft, M2. Officers respond to John's house, see him looking out through the upstairs window, and again, he won't come out. The legal question is, can an LEO enter the dwelling of a person named in an arrest warrant without consent if the charges are only misdemeanors? Yes. For Fourth Amendment purposes, there is no distinction between arrest warrants for felonies and those for misdemeanors. In our next scenario, Billy Moonpie, yeah, I made these names up. Anyway, Billy Moonpie has a warrant for his arrest for aggravated battery and F2. When officers respond to Billy's house to arrest him, Billy's wife tells the officers he's not there, but he's next door at the neighbor's house playing cards. Officers decide to walk next door and catch a glimpse of Billy through the window. They make contact with the neighbor, and the neighbor is not cooperative. He will not allow them to come inside. So our legal question is, can an LEO enter the dwelling of a third party in order to make a warrant arrest if the LEO reasonably believes that the person named in the warrant is inside? No. According to the U.S. Supreme Court in Stegall v. United States, to enter a third-party dwelling to make a warrant arrest, an LEO must have consent, exigent circumstances, or a search warrant to enter. And don't fall into the mindset that just because you saw him inside, suddenly it's exigent circumstances. When it comes to exigent circumstances, there are certain factors the courts are going to look at. And just because you think it was an emergency or exigent as a law enforcement officer doesn't mean the courts will. That part of law can get kind of complex, so I'm going to dedicate an entire future lesson to it. Look for it. While we're on the topic of arrest warrants, I might as well answer one of the most common questions I've ever been asked by both law enforcement officers and supervisors over the years. If the person named in the arrest warrant has a new address and the old address is on the warrant, can I still make an entry into their new residence? Yes. Let's face it, criminals tend to be a bit transient, so it's not unusual that the address on warrants are not the current addresses for the suspects we're chasing. Fortunately, the law doesn't require the current address to be on an arrest warrant for the officer to enter the dwelling. Here's what the law requires you to have to make an entry into a suspect's dwelling with an arrest warrant. 1. An LEO must have a reasonable belief that the location to be searched is the suspect's dwelling. That's it. It doesn't say anything about address, just a reasonable belief. And 2, an LEO must have reason to believe that the suspect is within that dwelling. And we've mentioned number 2 a couple times already in this lesson. Some of the factors you can use to show that a suspect has moved to a new location would be: have they forwarded their mail there? Have they changed their driver's license address? Do their family members say that they live there now? Did they sign a lease agreement with the landlord, and will the landlord give you a statement? Have you shown their pictures to neighbors and the neighbors say that yes, they've lived there full time for, say, a month? Those are some things that you can put in your report to show why you reasonably believe this is the suspect's dwelling now. And most importantly, document. It's going to increase your chances of winning the criminal case and reduce your chances of being named as a defendant in a civil case. Well, that's the end of the lesson. Stay safe out there.